Hi everybody, Justin here, hoping you had as great a weekend as I did. I spent my weekend not in Metro Detroit, but in pretty much the opposite of Metro Detroit. I spent my weekend up in Michigan's thumb, in no place other than Sebewaing, Michigan. Karin and I headed up Friday afternoon, and it was a gorgeous day. The sun shone beautifully across endless fields of growing crop, and wind turbines filled the horizon. The area is well known for its agricultural heritage, and one such celebration of that is Sugarfest in the town of Sebewaing, where we plan to spend our Saturday. As Friday came to an end, we looked forward to what the next day would bring. But as luck would have it, and in typical Michigan weather fashion, it decided to rain. But that's hardly any reason for a Michigander to cancel a day's activities. We're used to freezing temperatures and nasty weather year-round, so some warm weather with a spot of rain was nothing. People carried on with the various activities at Sugarfest on Saturday. Many of the activities included a chicken dinner, fair rides, feats of lumberjack artistry, and more. As luck would have it, however, the storms rolled in harder that day, and our plans for the rest of the day were pretty much squashed. Fireworks were slated for later that evening, and I believe they actually still were on when the time came, but we didn't really want to stick around and risk the weather being bad. So that being said, I want to leave you guys with some sort of photo tip. I try to, give you guys at least a little bit of advice. And being as 4th of July is just around the corner, I figured I'd teach you guys a little bit about how I shoot fireworks photography. It's really not that difficult as long as you have a few things. You'll need a tripod and you'll need a DSLR. Of course, it's not totally necessary that you have a DSLR, but having some sort of camera with some manual control is definitely a plus. You can get away with having a tripod and a cell phone. It's just a little bit of a different workflow, but I won't focus on so much of that because it's a lot trickier. But if you have a camera with some manual control, even a point and shoot that lets you control the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, or even just a couple of those things, you can usually work around it. So without further ado, here we go. This is how I shoot fireworks photography. I prefer to set up my shot in an open area with a nice view of the sky. It's always good to have a nice foreground subject, but not wholly necessary, so once you find a nice place to shoot, it's time to set up. A tripod is absolutely necessary for this if you want clean photos. Your camera, whether it's a fancy one or even your phone, will be using a slow shutter speed to let in more light, so eliminating the shaking of your hands is a huge first step. Once you set your camera up, keep in mind that you'll want a wide angle so you can capture all the fireworks you need in the shot. This largely depends on how far away you are from the fireworks that are being shot off. If you're really close, you'll want a wide angle such as a 16mm, 24, but if you're a little bit further away, you can get away with a 35 or a 50. I prefer to shoot my fireworks photos closer to the action. It just makes for bigger, more beautiful things. And honestly, in general, when you're shooting photography, you want to be closer to your subject if possible. I always prefer a lens with a wide aperture, so the lens lets in as much light as possible. Aperture is the opening through which light travels through a lens. So the wider that opening is, the more light can go in, and the better that lens is going to be in lower light situations. For example, if you're shooting with your phone, you most likely have a lens built into the phone that's around f2. Now, the lower the number, the wider the opening. The bigger the number, the smaller the opening. I usually tell other people when I'm giving them advice about picking a lens, if they're shooting in low light, you want that lower number. F2 is actually a lower number than some of my lenses on my camera. Now it's technically a smaller opening in proportion because, a cell phone camera is much smaller than an actual big lens. But at the end of the day, F2 is technically better than f2.8, which is like the lens I'm shooting on right now, this video. So whatever lens you work with, make sure that aperture number is as low as it will go. One last thing with your lens, if it has a focus window, set it to infinity and turn off your autofocus switch. Autofocus is going to be useless here. If you don't have a focus window, while it's light out, try and focus on something generally in the same place you think the fireworks are going to be coming from. If you have it in the ballpark, it'll be okay. The next thing to figure out is your ISO. ISO on a phone is automatically determined, so it just depends on what lighting your situation is. But if you're shooting with a DSLR, you can actually control what your ISO is. What's ISO? ISO is how sensitive the sensor, the thing that's actually taking the photo in your camera, how sensitive that thing is to light. Because we're shooting in the dark, generally I would say that your ISO needs to be set to a higher value, but that also introduces nasty image noise. However, we're going to be shooting fireworks, which is much like setting off a flash. So that's introducing more light, so you can actually stick to a low ISO. So for aperture and ISO, you can stick to pretty low numbers. This will create a clean image and it will give you the best possible result. Lastly, we've got shutter speed. Shutter speed is probably the most important part of fireworks photography. When I have my camera set up on a tripod, aperture set to low, ISO set to low, once those things are squared away, I usually set my shutter speed to around 10 seconds, give or take. I do some test shots beforehand if I can. But at the beginning of the show, I definitely take some test shots to make sure that I'm not overexposing the photo or underexposing. So let's say you have some fireworks that are just explosively huge, so a lot of light filling up the frame. So as you take photos, be sure to preview on the back of your screen how bright your photos are turning out. If they're turning out too bright at 10-second exposures, you'll want to turn it back down to maybe 2 or 5 seconds. Another tip, and probably the most important one, is the grand finale. You're probably thinking the grand finale is going to be your best photography. Well, in my case, I've actually found that it's some of the worst. Grand finales tend to have just one big burst of light all in the same area, so they're not quite as pretty. In fact, I've actually had to tune back the shutter speed quite a bit to like even as short as a second or shorter to try and kind of split up the explosions. I found that some of the most beautiful fireworks photography composites I've made are actually throughout the middle of the show, where some of the bigger fireworks are and where some of the less just white explosions are. That's not to say you can't get a great shot during the grand finale. It's totally possible, but don't bank on it. All right, guys, well, that being said, I hope you guys have a great 4th of July weekend when it comes to photography. If you decide to go out and shoot, remember, tripod is an absolute must. Whatever camera you bring out, I hope that it works out for the best of you. Remember, what I've said here today is kind of a baseline. It will get you to kind of the ballpark area of where you need to be photographically, but at the end of the day, it depends on what camera model and lens model and everything. All these things that come together work. So you're gonna need to do a lot of guess and check. You'll need to take as many test shots as you can, as quickly as you can to get to the right area where you need to be. You might get it right the first time, you might have to do some fiddling. But either way, fireworks photography is a blast, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every view you guys give me. Feel free to share this video with your friends and family if you want. If it helps them get some better fireworks photography, that's really all I need out of it. I hope you guys enjoyed my little adventure up in Michigan's thumb, and I'll see you guys next time.